Some researchers are interested in garden path sentences in their own right, just because they're interested in how we deal with ambiguity. Some of the chapter will talk about just the research that deals with ambiguity in general, but oftentimes researchers are interested in studying the processing of garden path sentences because these sentences give us a feel for the nature of language itself, and it helps us to understand more broad principles about the processing of language, things that we wouldn't know if we weren't to expose people to an ambiguous sentence or a garden path sentence. So they allow us to delve into aspects of language that we wouldn't be able to get at in other ways. One of the ways that we can measure, now I'm on page 286, one of the ways that we can measure processing difficulty is by comparing sentences that are written in with some temporary ambiguity, or like as a garden path sentence, versus sentences that have the same number of words, or sentences that have sentences that have the same number of words, in fact the same exact words, that are rearranged so that the ambiguity is reduced, so that there is no ambiguity, so that everything is clear. You can do that just by rearranging the words, or depending on the experimental paradigm, you can just add in the words that change a reduced relative clause back to a relative clause that's not reduced. In other words, to add back in who or that and make the sentence clearer. So an example of this is given on the bottom of page 287. Give me a second here. Sorry, that starts on the bottom of page 286 and continues to page 287. So we'll start with the first of these two sentences. The general presented copies of the report was aware of the problems. Okay. Being presented like this is a garden path sentence because we think first that the general presented is referring to a past tense verb of general doing something, that he is doing a presentation. So that we think at first that the general presented something. He presented the copies of the report. But then we realize when we get to those bolded words, was aware, that something in our processing was incorrect. The clarified version of this sentence is on the bottom of page 287. You can see if you add back in the words who was to modify the phrase so that the general who was presented copies of the report was aware of the problems. Now, the phrase was aware doesn't cause any difficulty in our processing or our sentence understanding or parsing. The comparison here is between the time, or is the time, the comparison here is a comparison of how long it takes individuals to focus on the words was aware in the first sentence versus the second sentence. We don't present the same sentence to the same individuals, but we present in experimental between subjects experimental paradigm where we present to some participants the first sentence and to other participants the second sentence, and we average over their times, and we see how long did it take people to process the first sentence versus how long did it take to process the second sentence. And if that difference is a large difference, then we say that the first sentence is a particularly difficult sentence to understand. If the difference is very small, or if there's no difference at all in the processing, then we say that it's not an ambiguous sentence, it's not a garden path sentence, and there's no difficulty at all. So some garden path sentences are more difficult than others, and they'll take longer to process on those bolded words was aware. The methods of how that's accomplished are outlined in box 8.1, method 8.1, and that box there suggests that depending on the experimental laboratory that's doing the analysis, the test will be done different ways, but many times it's done as is outlined with those dashes. All the letters in a sentence are covered with dashes, but when a participant clicks on a button, then some of the words in the sentence appear from underneath the dashes, and then when the button is pressed again, those words disappear and the next sequence of words is presented. And so they can measure how long it takes as each series of words in the sentence is presented, how long is a participant focusing on those words. So that's how that's measured. But the important thing to take away is that the comparison of certain key parts of a sentence illustrates for us how difficult that sentence was. In other words, how the processing load that it requires cognitively.